Now, part of what you're supposed to be doing when you do the pre-flight, as this pilot is you're supposed to be checking to see if that aircraft is in condition for safe flight. Because the responsibility for determining that an aircraft is truly safe to fly just before you get in it and fly away is the pilot in command of the aircraft. He's the one who's got the chance, while he walks around and does the pre-flight, to look it over, see if there's anything missing, like an aileron, a tail, something like that. Odder things have happened when maintenance people have gotten involved. So it's the pilot in command's responsibility before he gets in that airplane and takes it up in the air to make sure that it is indeed in condition for safe flight. But who is supposed to make sure that the airplane is maintained? Aha! That's where the owner or operator of the aircraft comes into play. It is the responsibility of the owner or operator of the aircraft to properly ensure that the aircraft is maintained in an airworthy condition. So the owner or operator is supposed to maintain the aircraft. As part of that, it is the responsibility of the owner-operator to make sure that the maintenance people make all the appropriate entries in the aircraft maintenance records. Aircraft maintenance records is a fancy name for the log books. But it is the owner or operator's responsibility to make sure that the appropriate logbook entries are made, indicating whatever maintenance has been done on the aircraft, and also indicating that it has been approved for return to service. So if you as a pilot want to determine whether an aircraft is airworthy, in addition to a pre-flight inspection, you really need to review the maintenance records on the aircraft. Now, aircraft have to have what you might call a medical also. Aircraft have to be inspected every 12 calendar months. So they get a checkup, just like the pilots do, to make sure that everything is working right on the aircraft. This is what we call the annual inspection on the aircraft. And the annual inspection is good. It expires not on the same day of the month, but on the end of the month, the end of the 12th calendar month. Annual meaning once a year. It's good to the end of the 12th calendar month. For example, they'll say to you that the aircraft had an annual inspection performed on July 12th of this year, and when will the next annual inspection be due? Well, that annual is good for how many months? 12 months, so it's going to be due next year. And is it due on the same day of the month or the last day of the month? Which one? The last day of the month. So if an annual was done on July 12th, the next annual inspection will be due on July 31st, the last day of July, the following year, 12 months later. When the annual is completed, some stuff has to go in the aircraft maintenance records, those log books, and the aircraft maintenance records have to show completion of the annual inspection. It has to show the date of the inspection, and it has to show that the aircraft was returned to service by whoever it was that did the annual inspection. That's the information that has to be in the log books. The annual has been completed, the date of the annual, and that the aircraft is returned to service. Otherwise, they wouldn't know for sure whether the annual was completed satisfactorily. In addition to an annual inspection, you also have to have 100-hour inspections on some aircraft. The 100-hour inspections are required for rental aircraft that are used for flight instruction. So rental aircraft that are also used for flight instruction have to have both the annual inspection, because all aircraft have to have that, plus they have to have the 100-hour inspections also. Example. Let's assume an aircraft had a 100-hour inspection when the tachometer read 1259.6. So the tach read 1259.6. When would the next 100-hour inspection be due? Well, the next one's due 100 hours later, which would be at 1359.6, 100 hours later. It's hard to hit that 100 hours exactly. Can you exceed it at all? A little bit. The 100-hour limit can be exceeded, but not by more than 10 hours if It's necessary to reach a place where the inspection can be done on the aircraft. Now that 10-hour that you can exceed it does not let you go flying around and doing whatever you want to with the aircraft. It does let you go over the 100-hour limit by not more than 10 hours if you have to do it in order to get the aircraft someplace where the inspection can be done. Now, the thing is that that excess time gets deducted from the next 100 hours as far as computing when the next 100-hour inspection is due. You don't get to keep pushing back when the 100-hour inspection is due by going over your time 10 hours every time. It comes out of the next chunk of 100 hours. For example, a 100-hour inspection was due at 3302.5 on the tack. By the time they got the airplane someplace where it could be inspected, the inspection was actually done at 3309.5. When is the next 100-hour inspection due? It's due 100 hours from when it was supposed to have been done, not from when you actually got around to it. So the next 100-hour inspection will be due at 3402.5, which is 100 hours from when it was due at 3302.5. You don't get to keep pushing the 100 hours along. That 10 hours that you can go over comes out of the next 100-hour chunk. Airworthiness directives are something that airplanes are kind of plagued with from time to time. Airworthiness directives are issued by the FAA to correct some kind of safety problem with the aircraft, and the FAA says you must do this, or you must fix that, or you must change this part in order for the aircraft to be safe. You have to do it. It's mandatory. And to show that you've done it, to show compliance with it, the owner or operator has to have it recorded in the aircraft maintenance records, in the logbooks, so that a mechanic or a buyer of the airplane or the FAA, if it gets down to that, can check and see whether a particular airworthiness directive has indeed been complied with. It has to be entered in the aircraft maintenance records in the logbooks. So ADs are mandatory, but can a pilot operate an aircraft that is not in compliance with an airworthiness directive? Well, the answer is yes, if. And that if is if it's allowed by the airworthiness directive itself. A pilot may operate an aircraft that is not in compliance with the AD. ADs often have a list of conditions that allow for an aircraft to be operated during non-compliance. For instance, the AD may not be effective until so many hours more on the aircraft, or if you do certain things, you can still operate the aircraft during that period of non-compliance. In case you don't recognize this particular airplane, don't worry about it. Nobody else will either. This is a Cessna that's had a turboprop engine hung on the front of it. That is a very major alteration, and it will substantially affect that aircraft's operation in flight. Any alteration or repair that might substantially affect an aircraft's operation in flight, if that's been done, the aircraft has to be test flown. Who's it have to be test flown by? An appropriately rated pilot, and he has to approve it for return to service before passengers are carried in that aircraft. I guess the FAA figures it's not cricket to have passengers along on a test flight. And what kind of certificate does the pilot have to have? He's got to be at least a private pilot certificate. I guess the FAA is not too hot about having student pilots be test pilots. So it's got to be test flown by an appropriately rated pilot and approved for return to service before you carry passengers on board, and the pilot's got to be at least a private pilot.